Cape Cod Broadcasting weaves the listening environments of 99.9 WQRC, Ocean 104.7, WFCC Classical 107.5, Cape Country 104, and CapeCon.com's website experience to reflect the lifestyles of the people who live, work, and play on Cape Cod. We hope that you enjoy this podcast.
Good morning, I'm Rob Woodard. This is Sunday Journal. With me today is Lindsey, Counsell, and Michael Moynihan of Three Bays Preservation. We're going to be discussing that organization and the efforts they're making to combat erosion on the Cape. Good morning, gentlemen. Thanks for joining me here.
Thank you for having us, Rob.
Sure. So, Lindsey, let me start with you. Can you tell us about the organization as a whole? Kind of, what is Three Bays Preservation?
Three Bays Preservation is a nonprofit environmental organization that is really, its goal is to preserve, maintain, protect, and enhance the Three Bays watershed of Barnstable.
Okay. How did you get started?
It was originally started by a small group that was looking to protect Dead Neck Island from overwash, and it quickly morphed from there into an environmental advocacy group that really looked at the entire area and saw the decline in water quality that had occurred over the years.
Okay. And what role do you play?
I'm executive director of the organization, so I coordinate a lot of the activities, participate in fundraising, events, program planning, those kinds of things.
Right. And Michael, tell me about your involvement.
I'm a longtime resident of the Cape, and a few years ago it became known to me that there was an opening on the board, the Treasury there, on the Board of Trustees, and knowing that the water quality on the Cape is far degraded from where it was when I was a kid, and very concerned with that, I viewed this as an opportunity to get involved with an organization that's doing a great job at looking out for water quality on the Cape.
And what are some of the efforts that you're doing in pursuit of that goal?
There is, as you mentioned, part of the erosion control of Dead Neck is widening of the Katuitt Bay Channel, which has come to an extremely narrow condition, that it's record narrowness that's creating erosion over there. And by opening that, it'll increase flushing of the Three Bays area. There are some other educational programs involved. We do a lot of water quality testing. We're trying to get more involved in the oyster aquaculture, which will help do some of the filtration. Lindsey's involved in the 208 plan. There is a whole host of activities that Three Bays Preservation is involved in, of trying to get the town to move forward with a lot of these opportunities to clean up the watersheds.
When you say clean up, I don't know which one of you wants to discuss this. What's going on? Why is there such a dire need for cleaning up this area?
Well, the need is a result of the development pressures that came to the Cape in the 70s and 80s without the needed infrastructure, the support system to sustain that growth. So what occurred is that much of the nutrients have passed through our sandy soils here from septic systems and have polluted the bays and ponds of our area. And the effort now is to really address that head on and clean up that environmental problem that we've created.
And how are you going to go around? I mean, Michael mentioned like shellfish and things like that, but what are some of the other measures that you're anticipating?
Well, first of all, and particularly in the town of Barnstable, we need to address the planning process head on. We've been working around various implementation methods through traditional wastewater planning, but with the implementation of the new 208 planning process that the Cape Cod Commission has implemented through the State Department of Environmental Protection and the EPA, we're looking forward to a new watershed-based planning program that will move the planning process forward much more quickly than the traditional town-wide planning. So we'll be able to address areas in the Three Bays or the Centerville River watershed or the Hyannis area individually, and this will broaden our approach. And what comes with that is many innovative ways to deal with nitrogen overloading in the coastal bays. And one of those, as Mike mentioned, was oysters. Oysters are an effective filter of nitrogen. Mm-hmm. But there are many other techniques, over 40, that are involved in the 208 planning process that we'll be able to use to implement this environmental cleanup.
So when you say that when development is taking place, there's going to be an eye toward the impact on the watershed in particular. So in other words, you're talking about drainage, possible hard surface, hardscaping. All of these things are going to be considered, looking out for the watershed so that when pollutants come down, there's going to have to be an adequate way to address it.
Yes, that's a good point. It will be a comprehensive look at all these techniques. Stormwater management, as you mentioned, and hardscaping needs to be looked at closely because that directs fertilizers and airborne pollutants right into the groundwater here in the Cape. And our porous soils take that and move it right into the bays and ponds directly. So we need to deal with those types of things early on in the planning process and then implement solutions to resolve the problem that already exists.
So I know that you have a big project going on at Sampson's Island in Dead Neck. You want to tell me some more about that? What exactly you're doing there?
Yes, we have received permit from the local conservation commission to widen the channel at the Cotuit entrance by 400 feet. That'll give roughly a 3 or 4% improvement in flushing in the lower Cotuit Bay area and result in immediate improvement in water quality there. That's a simple solution for that area. It also gives us the opportunity to place sand on Dead Neck Island to restore the coastal nesting bird habitat there.
Yeah, I was going to get to that. Birds are playing a role here as well.
Yes, they're very important. We acquired Dead Neck as a bird sanctuary with our partner, Mass Audubon, and it's a 130-acre island out there that really is a significant habitat for those animals, and we'll use the sand from the Cotuit Entrance Channel to rebuild habitat on the island.
What are some of the bird types that you'll find there?
There's piping plovers, as I mentioned, least terns, common terns. We get occasional visits from roseate terns that are transiting the areas. We have oyster catchers, just a myriad of birds that use the area, either for nesting or for a stop-off when they're migrating.
And I know that Mike, back to you, I know that the organization is involved with monitoring the Cape's estuaries and just kind of the general water quality. What are some of the things that you're finding?
When I was a kid, we used to be able to go down and get blue crabs and find an abundance of oysters and clams almost anywhere you wanted to go on the waterfront. Mm-hmm. That's not the case any longer. It's no surprise that many areas are closed to the taking of shell fishing. There are no more eelgrass beds. I haven't seen a scallop other than out in front of Calmus in many, many years, where they used to be very prolific in the area. Again, Oyster Harbors is named, the island that's in the middle of the Three Bays watershed is named after oysters, and yet the only oysters that are currently really available are on grants that are being raised. Mm-hmm. So in the monitoring, what we see is the turbidity is way up, the nitrogen loading is significant, the water quality is just atrocious. Anyone that drives down some of the roads and looks at the Centerville Bay watershed can see the large algae blooms where there's nothing but green algae all up in the head of the Centerville River watershed, and that's Prince's Cove gets very undesirable in the summer, to say the least, as well as some of the other inland watersheds that are really badly impacted by the nitrogen loading and the significant pressures that we've put on it as a society. And
the nitrogen loading is a direct result, my understanding is that it's a direct result of septic systems just kind of trickling down through the environment and making its way into the watershed?
That's definitely a very significant contributing factor. I think what's almost an equal part is the degradation of our waterfront's ability to handle that nitrogen loading. There's always been some amount of inflow, and we do not have, as we said, the abundance of filter feeders, being the oysters, the clams, the scallops, as well as some of the other natural habitat that used to take that nitrogen loading and convert it to usable form. So, yes, we've increased the amount of load on the system, but we've also degraded the system's ability to handle that load. So there's a number of things we can do to fix that problem.
Now, why is that degradation taking place? Is it just because there's so much nitrogen coming into the water that it's just overwhelming the natural filters? Or, Lindsey, can you tell me about that?
That's it in a nutshell, Rob. It's just too much nitrogen coming into the system. The system can only absorb so much, so there's a limit. In salt water, it's nitrogen. In fresh water, it's phosphorus. The system can only take so much, and as a result, when excess nitrogen is present, you get these algae blooms. That does a number of things. It shadows the bottom, so eelgrass can't grow and thrive, like a lawn won't thrive in shade. Or you get just a general clogging of the system through, the excess nutrients being there, and the algae will die and cover the bottom and create a muck situation there, and layers upon layers of this muck create the sludge and slop that we see on shorelines now instead of the good, stable, sandy bottom. So it really affects the habitat. It has a trickling effect down to even finfish that used to use our bays as a giant nursery. Well, it's not there anymore, so you see declines in striped bass and bluefish in the offshore resources. So it's sort of a cascading effect that this has, and it's reaching the point now where there may be a point of no return if we don't act now.
And what are some of the things? Are you actually, again, you have mentioned, both of you have mentioned the increasing the bivalves and the mollusks that will filter the water. Are you actually out there planting eelgrass, planting seeds for shellfish, or?
Well, we have been involved in shellfish propagation for a number of years. We work with the town of Barnstable Natural Resource Department. We acquired a couple of shellfish propagating devices called Flupsies, where they put young seedlings in there and use that as a mechanism to grow them out while they're small and very susceptible to predation. And then they transplant them out. But these are small numbers of animals. It worked in the area of Prince's Cove, but we really need to jump those numbers by a great magnitude. Really, we need millions and millions of oysters to help begin a small part of the problem. And there are other techniques that are available, things such as wetlands restoration. If you take some of these abandoned cranberry bogs that have degraded into a substandard ecosystem and put in the natural curvature of the old stream bed that may have gone through there, that area in the freshwater system will actually take up a large amount of nitrogen before it passes into the saltwater ecosystem. And there are several other techniques that are coming out of the 208 planning process that we're anxious to look at and begin to review so that we can begin to stem this tide of nitrogen coming into the bays.
Now, I know that you're doing some dredging projects. What role does dredging play? Is that an attempt just to remove some of the pollutants from the area, or what's the story with that?
Well, dredging is one of the easier fixes because you have an immediate result. As soon as you finish a project, you get more flushing to the bays. Mm-hmm. So when you take offshore water that is not contaminated with nitrogen and allow it to flow freely into an embayment area, you immediately improve the water quality in the embayment, so there is a restoration. You start to see some of the native species come back, whether it's animals that live on the bottom or creatures that come in because of the cleaner water. So that's an easy fix. It's along the lines of culvert widening, for example. You've seen a bunch of that over the past few years where they've restored marshes by widening some of the ancient culverts that were in there. And there's other techniques. We mentioned stormwater, taking these direct discharge pipes that used to flow into these wet areas and treating them in these basins that will be covered with plants so they can take up nitrogen. Those are the simple and easy fixes that we've already begun on that can take pollutants directly out. But there are other techniques that need to be used to intercept the pollutants that are actually in the groundwater now that are traveling underground beneath us to the bays. And that'll involve a little bit more involved techniques. One thing called the permeable reactive barrier actually sets up a barrier area along a coastal embayment, and you intercept the groundwater with reactive material that'll actually take up the nitrogen at that point. So there are a number of techniques that can be used to head this nutrient off.
Sure. You're listening to Sunday Journal. I'm Rob Woodard. Today I'm talking with Lindsey Counsell and Michael Moynihan of Three Bays Preservation. We're discussing that organization and their efforts to monitor and clean up some of the Cape's estuaries. So obviously, guys, all of this takes money. Where do you get your funding from, and how are you doing with regard to that?
I'll leave that to the treasurer.
The funding of Three Bays, we're a nonprofit organization directly dependent upon the generosity of everyone that's involved in it. All of our members and people that are aware of the organization make annual donations to it. It would be great if historically it's met the need. We have embarked on a couple of very expensive endeavors in the past 2 years, and certainly the till is lower than I've ever seen it in my involvement in the bays. But again, great things take great efforts, and we're stepping out and leading the charge and spending far more than we're taking in. But it is an organization that is supported by the generosity of its donors and because of the great work that we do. A lot of times, as you know, people don't understand what
Right.
you're doing, so we appreciate the opportunity to come on the air and let folks know, look, we're doing an awful lot of things here. Please help support three-base preservation.
It's an important endeavor, obviously, very important to the Cape and how we all live here. So, Lindsey, let's get back to the organization itself. Can you tell me how it was developed and what, how has three-base preservation grown over the years?
Well, we started, as I mentioned early on, recognizing that there was a need for water quality improvement. And we've really looked at what we could do to best facilitate that process. And what we found on early that back in the 90s and early 2000s that we needed more science and we needed more information. There were a lot of suppositions on what was out there in terms causing the problem, but there was no hard science. So we work with Brian Howes at UMass Dartmouth and helped develop the Mass Estuaries Project that really began to quantify the problem. And we then took some forays into oyster propagation and those kinds of things and looked at various treatment techniques such as the dredging that may improve water quality and have really helped facilitate the 208 planning process that we're now in that will really let towns embark on solidly based cleanup solutions. And that's really where we are now, not just the traditional sewering that was the option just a mere 10 years ago.
Right. Yeah, obviously another big concern, very expensive process to get sewering to help clean up, but all very important work. Well, thanks, gentlemen, for joining me today. Unfortunately we're out of time, and thanks again for being here. I was talking today with Lindsey Counsell and Michael Moynihan of Three Bays Preservation, and we were talking about that organization and the efforts they're making to combat erosion and dirty water, for lack of a better term, on Cape Cod. I'm Rob Woodard. This is Sunday Journal.
This podcast is a presentation of Cape Cod Broadcasting, which is solely responsible for its content. Thank you for listening. For more information, please visit us at capecodbroadcasting.com.